Hi everybody. Welcome to our second webinar in our service-oriented IT webinar series. Today we're going to jump right into things. Today we are going to talk about IT components hierarchy, specifically focusing on clients and services. As per our regular format for this webinar series, the format is a panelist discussion on key considerations related to today's topic. Specifically, what we're going to focus on is a discussion around services and clients, some of services of which are generic to an organization, for example, desktop enablement, and some services which are more specific to an operating unit, HR, marketing, etc. This is really a focus on the first and second tier of the IT component hierarchy. An introduction of our panelists today. Pierre?
Yes, good morning everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you're coming from. My name is Pierre Paquette. I'm the technical lead here at RAPA. My background, spanning back 25, 30 years in software development, but in the tail end, the last 5, 10 years, have really been focused on the services side and how the technologies can now be used by our different clients to get the most out of the technology. So my head is grounded in technology initially, but really it's how do we make the relationship between the technology and the business side and getting the most out of it from an IT as an organization.
My name is Susan Odell. I'm the business lead for RAPA, and my background is entirely steeped on the business side of IT in enterprise software and services. Specifically, what I bring to the organization is a focus on strategic planning, operational accountability, and looking at how we can get business value out of technology and measuring those links between technology and business value, business outputs. Background is diverse in terms of asset management, systems management, document management, and learning management systems. Richard?
Yeah, and I'm Richard Lavoc. I'm the IT service management lead for RAPA. Also bring 25 plus years of experience to the table in all forms of consulting, business, and system-wise. Last 15 years or so focusing on IT service management and the implementation of IT service management, obviously, linked to best practices such as, ITIL and ISO and COBIT. My point of view is always with regards to, process and trying to make sure that we establish the right process in the organization. So hence, why our team is I believe so strong. We cover the gamut of the aspects of doing IT service management in an organization.
Terrific. So we have less than 30 minutes, and we intend the webinars to be short, provide you with a lot of information. If you would like a printed copy, PDF copy of this presentation and this session, please let us know. So diving right into the topics. As you'll see on the right-hand side, actually Richard created this graphic for us. We're going to work over the next 4 months to give you valuable information about the different layers of the hierarchy within IT components. So between now and July, we do have a total of 11 webinars, but we have 4 specifically related to this topic. So today, clients and services on April 21st, we'll be talking about systems and applications. On May 26th, we'll be talking about hardware, software, and contracts. And then on July 7th, the operational and service level agreements that apply to the entire hierarchy and how we ensure that our clients are getting the services that they expect and at the level of quality that they are anticipating. Today, though, we'll be focusing on clients and services.
Okay. Yeah, it's maybe just skip back to that slide. We are starting at clients and services, and it's the top of the chart, but often from in an IT organization, we often think of what technologies we have and how can we deliver them as services. I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that in other slides, but there is a reason why we are starting with clients and services. It's really, that's the goal, right? The IT is to provide the services out to the clients. Forget about how they're being deployed and whether they're going to be in the cloud or not in the cloud and what technologies are going to be used. First and foremost, we need to talk about what do we want to provide and to whom. Good.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to put it into further context and why the role of services is so fundamentally important, services are the things that the CIO is providing to clients, and they must be clearly defined, packaged, and priced, and made available in a simple way that the client or your customer, whether it's external to the organization or within the organization but external to IT, it has to be easy for them to understand, to consume, and to acquire. And so this top layer here, clients being the consumers of things that IT delivers, bundled in packages that are business services through the service catalog. Everything else underneath this is a complexity to the client, but must be well managed within IT. So let's talk a little bit about the details underneath that feed up to the services. Richard, could you start on the business side?
Yeah, so just to go back to what Sue was saying, and it's something I've, maybe I tend to abuse as a sentence, but it's about sheltering the client from the complexity. IT, we've been really good about, training our clients to talk our language, but in the end, as a service provider, it should be the other way around. We should be talking the business language. We should be able to go to them with the services they need, not them coming to us with the technologies they want. So in this graphic, what we're showing is really, the two sides of the story, the business view and more of the operational technical view. The business, calling it the business CMDB. CMDB is sometimes a term that, organizations like or dislike, depending on if they try to actually do something with it or not. But the idea here is that, CMDB must be seen more as a repository, a virtual repository of information. We're not talking about necessarily a database, but different pieces of information that need to come together. From a business perspective, there's a bunch of things that need to work together for us to provide the service. It's the operational side and the operational teams, how they work to contribute to a service. The business management, how is the organization managed? What are the pieces and how do they work together? Procurement, how are we getting services or components? How do they come into play? What are the contracts that are controlling these procurement exercises? How do they fit within ultimately the service we deliver? Support, same idea. The help desk and our service desk are clearly part of the overall service we provide. When we provide a service to a client, it includes providing the support to that service, and so that needs to come into play. Human resources, having the right people in place, having understanding who does what, and then the overall governance of all of this. So that's the business aspects. But sometimes when we talk CMDB, when we talk putting a service together, we tend to focus on the right-hand side, the technology and the links between those things. But we need to understand, the business of doing IT and how these things link together also. So hence the importance of showing both sides here. Pierre?
Yeah, like often, to your point, Richard, is when we talk about CMDB, we start talking about putting, configuration items in there, and we talk about the different components that we want to manage. And sure enough, you need to know which components you are managing. And beyond that, you also need to know how those components are interrelated. From an operational point of view, from impact assessment, from risk analysis, knowing your data center components, your servers, your desktop and your mobile components, and how those pieces of technology are being used within your organization. So the technical part is something that traditionally IT has been good at, and I'll use that as in silos they've been managing these things really well. You have competent technical people who are managing your data centers and your servers and so on. What really needs to happen is the coming together of these components and how they are connected, and also how they then relate back to the business side, to the those items that Richard has identified as well. And again, it's sheltering the users of those services from all those technical components and from all those business components. It's that level of abstraction that's needed. One thing we maybe didn't mention also is, when we look at services, from a business point of view, which is the office of the CIO, will often look at services from that vantage point. Very rarely will the CIO be drilling down into the technical aspects of how databases are set up and how your security is set up. These are all important things, but at the end of the road, it's really how are they contributing to the services we're providing. If you have some technology that doesn't map up to a service, you really need to then ask the question, why do we have that technology? So again, it's tying all those pieces together and having a clear picture from a business point of view of all the components.
You know, a lot of people talk about business analysis and, you know, making sure you understand the impacts and the risks and the success factors and how you're going to get to your end goal. We talk about IT business analysis and analytics because, to your point, you know, you can't have a service and just look at one stream or one component of IT, whether it's on the business side or the technical side. You got to look at everything, all the components that make that up on both sides and say, you know, am I considering everything from an HR, the resources that are supporting those components, how do they come together, how are they dependent upon each other, what if one piece fails, how is it going to impact another aspect, you know, of the business side of IT, and how does that relate up to services. So it's a big picture that it's a tough job, right? But IT's got to look at it holistically and consider all of those factors.
Yeah, and to that point, and to the point Pierre was making earlier, you know, we wish CIOs were thinking services because that's what they should ultimately represent. But in many organizations, CIOs still think database servers, server farms, and those kinds of things, and not really what those things mean to the service we deliver to our clients.
Right.
So there's certainly an education aspect to this too within an organization.
Yeah, a lot of, to that point again, CIOs often go in and talk about, okay, we need to make change within IT and become more service oriented, and often they're not even quite sure what that means and where to start. So yeah, it's defining the services from a consumer of services, and that's really important from there. You know, one thing we failed to mention is in these subcomponents, there is as much work that needs to be done in each component. So if you are looking at server, storage, and network devices, you know, there is change management and, you know, incidents tied to your operations management. So all that stuff is important, but realizing that, you know, it does boil up and it does relate to the big picture of providing the service. So yes, the operational people are busy doing asset management or doing configuration management. Your help desk is busy, you know, servicing requests, and your finance department's doing procurement. All that stuff is related, and I think that's one of the areas that is often maybe not overlooked, but maybe not put enough emphasis on how they connect together and why we're doing things the way we're doing it, so that each of the stakeholders can benefit from the information we're collecting and we're managing, so that the service is clear and that we can clearly cost out a service, clearly define that a service is effective or is not effective, is still in use or not in use, and so on.
Okay, good conversation. So before we move into breaking down the hierarchy of the services delivered to clients, Richard, can you just take us through the definitions?
Yeah, so these are, you know, kind of ITIL definitions, maybe with a spin or two from, you know, my experience and background. The idea of an IT service, what it is, it's a capability. It's something that, you know, we as IT deliver to our clients that support either directly or indirectly one or more of their business processes or functions. So what this says in the end is the IT service has to somehow be linked to business processes or functions. Otherwise, we have to question either the way that the service is defined or its very existence. If we're not supporting the business or business functions in any way, why are we delivering that service? So it may just be a question of the way the services are defined, but in some cases it may just be that we have a service on our books that is not, you know, of any value. And in the service catalog, I mean, people have different views, and you know, they have, depending on, you know, some of the software providers, Service catalog goes from being like a very detailed list of the requests you can make to to more a general document. I really see the service catalog as something that is client-facing, client-focused, not end-user focused. And a service catalog is just a structured document that provides information about the services we deliver to our clients. In a sense, it's our glossy, our elevator pitch of this is the business we're in. It should include all live services and those that we can actually deliver that are available if we have new services coming. And then it should be a point of reference for us as an IT service provider to show this is our business, this is what we're doing. So if it's not in this book, you as the client have to talk to us and say, well, we need something else or we need something different. But our business catalog, our service catalog should say, this is what we're in the business of doing.
Right, and that's again to your point about shielding the clients from the complexities, that the how is not relevant from the catalog point of view.
Exactly.
Yeah, and part of, these definitions are somewhat clear. How they're interpreted is often the challenge. If you have a technical mind and you're looking at these two definitions, you can come up with some really cool services and build a pretty cool service catalog. But are they really the services that the end user wants? So I think there's a caveat there in terms of defining your IT services. Is yes, define them. It's maybe not as straightforward as you think it is. It's good to get your clients involved in terms of finding out what they want, how they perceive what they're getting from IT, and that will help shape the IT service from a business point of view, from a client point of view, as opposed to from that technical point of view. And again, that's part of that whole change process that IT organizations are going through. Is they're not providers of technology, they're providers of service. And it's been said so many times, but it really needs to come back to that every time in terms of saying, okay, is this really a service, or am I just saying, oh, I'm giving them some technology? Maybe not all the way down to you're getting a server, but that's one extreme. So you wouldn't see that type of service in your service catalog that, hey, I'm going to give you a server. It's more, okay, what are you going to do with that server? And maybe that's more related to the service itself as opposed to the server, the technology.
Just before we move on to the next slide, I think this discussion raises a really good point of why you would deliver or build or construct a particular service and why a client might request it. What is the overall strategic objective of the organization, and how is IT's overall plan supporting that? How are the services supporting that overall plan? Like, there really is an ability to do your checks and balances at the highest level, so that the investments you're making or how you might respond to a request for a new IT service can be said, yeah, you know what, I'm going to look at developing that, or I'm going to enhance the service because I know that it's supporting the organization's goals overall. There's alignment all throughout the organization. So I think that's an important factor as well.
And an interesting point here also is that, in the push to be an IT service organization, everyone wants to have a service within the organization. So when you first do this, if you don't frame it well, you will have services for every task that a person does. Right. And it just becomes like a hodgepodge of different things. So it has to be framed well. There's no point in saying, sending a blank sheet of paper to people and saying, define your services, because it just won't all work together. And it shouldn't be, in the end, rocket science, because we know what the business of IT is, and we know what our business is doing, so it should be fairly straightforward to come up with an initial list of the high-level business services anyways.
Yeah, and it's not a list of 100 services, right? Richard, can you talk about that? It's like, I think people might have a perception that there's, it can be not granular, but flexible, and your experience and our experience with clients is that you want to contain them to a pretty finite set of things, right?
Yeah, I mean, rule of thumb, I would say, 10, 12 services is a very good starting point, because we're talking about overall big business services here. Even if you go to extremely large organizations that provide, service to external clients, and you look at their service lines, they don't have 600 service lines. They usually have 3, 4, or 5, on which then you would negotiate specific things, but that's their service line, that's their service catalog in a way. Then after that, you get into the details and the complexities, but the first glance should be fairly straightforward. So yeah, 10, 12 is a good starting point.
Sorry about that, Richard. That's a great segue to the next slide, because we're going to talk about, and if you can just continue along that thought of the perception of what a service is, I think is where things start to fall apart, right?
Well, yeah, the term service has been, used and abused quite a bit in, the last, 10 years or more now with, ITIL gathering steam. But, really trying to break down what those services are. This graphic here kind of shows, different elements of service, if you want. So trying to identify what these different things are. At the highest level, the simple thing that your end users would see, IT service items. These are the things that an end user would ask for. If it's, getting a new desktop is a service item, that's where it would be. Getting that, that desktop is a service item within a business service that could be whatever you call it, desktop management or end user computing or something of that nature. That would be the business service. So we're in the business service of providing end user computing. And that service then would break down into technical components. There's technical services. So there's a service desk component to it. There's a networking component to it, and so on and so forth. Those would be, if you want, the technical services that we internally combine to actually deliver a business service. So again, it's not a one-to-one link. You could have one IT technical service that supports many business services, and obviously one business service that uses many technical IT service to bring everything together. And then from there, you would go down into what actual configuration item and assets support these different services. But it's a hierarchy, and if we say service, if we just say the term service, people can think of any and all of these things, and it makes conversations very difficult.
Right, they think or perceive a service item to be a service, and it's not. A service item is a component. Can you, just for those attendees and people that are going to be watching this later and when we record the video and post it, can you just talk a little bit about the journey to establishing your service offering capability? Like, this is not a, I'm going to define 12 services and I'm going to build them all at the same time. Like, there's an operational capability and capacity that people need to consider when they're moving along this path. So can you talk about that progression and where maybe start?
Yeah, certainly the approach, the first thing is to really understand the business services that you're in. So really trying to clearly define those, because that's where you're defining the business you're in. So that is the essential, I believe, first step to go forward. A lot of organizations have a tendency to start with the technical components. Of course, as IT, we understand those better, but this is where you get into the confusion of, well, is doing a backup a service, and is ramping up a service, or what are these things? And so you could have a plethora of technical services that don't mean anything. So start with, this is the business service we're in. Then you need to actually describe those business services, not necessarily what you're showing the client, but internally. You need to create the specifications for that business service. How is it made? How is it built? How is it sustained? And in organizations that have done this fully, they will even have in there, how do I replace that service at the end of its life? That would be included in the definition of that service. From there, that you can understand what the technical things you will need to accomplish that service. So it's really building down from the business service.
Terrific. Okay, so we have two examples we're going to go through just to make this real in terms of breaking it down a little bit further. So the first one is looking at end user enablement, and this is more of a generic example. So Richard, if you could take us through this one, that would be great.
Yeah, again, the same example, that the same structure that we've talked about on the previous slide, this is just an example to say, in the user request catalog, or however that catalog's called, the end user catalog, you would have things that the user can make requests either by calling the service desk or even a self-service portal where they could go in and make these requests. These are broken down to specific types of requests. Can I set up a new user, install software, and so on, targeted at the user. These are driven by an overall business service. In this case, we called it end user enablement, which covers all of these different elements into one comprehensive business service, which is end user enablement. A client that would come to us would say, I need end user enablement from you, and then negotiate through an SLA, the specific elements, how they should be, who should be allowed to do different things. Yeah. That would be part of the business service.
Just interject for a second, Richard. When one of our clients, it's not an all or nothing thing either, where they, for example, have end user enablement print services is something that they're buying that component, but not other things because they're not ready to consume those other things as part of end user enablement. So I think that's an important message as well, is that it is about your specific situation and what things can be consumed in that or can be defined today versus things that might come later on down the road.
Of course, I mean, trying to get the 100% solution on day one is not the best way to go about this. So, but the end user enablement is made up of then a bunch of technical services that would be in a service catalog about the different things that we do as an IT organization to support that service. And I say as an IT organization, but actually you could then see easily how certain of these components could be outsourced. Maybe my IT organization doesn't handle the end user devices. We've outsourced that to an organization, but it's still part of our end user enablement service. And to our client or our end users, it should be transparent whether it comes from us internally or an outsourced or capability.
Yeah, those technical services is creeping into the whole technical side of things. And you mentioned the agreement that you've got between the services and the clients who are consuming them, the SLA. Once we get down to the technical service catalog or the technical services, we're starting to look more at maybe the OLAs and how they then relate. And the operational level agreements will dictate what you can provide in a service level agreement. And sometimes the service level agreement will be a little bit more I guess more competitive, and you're relying on your operational people to support it through the use of the SLAs. And on the topic of outsourcing some of these technical services, it's one thing to keep in mind is that IT is still part of that exchange with vendors. I mean, even though a technical service will be outsourced, IT is still the broker of that service, and just not to lose track of that it's not a business. It's not a business transaction. It's still a technical transaction going through IT to broker the new service. And yes, it's abstracted. Whether you do it internally on-prem or you do it in the cloud or you outsource it, IT still needs to be part of that.
Yeah.
Of course. Yeah.
Okay, we're down to our final 2 minutes. So on the next slide, very quickly, this is more of a specific IT for HR. I don't know how much more you want to add here, but I guess it's a complexity underneath that can be a little more detailed in some ways.
Yeah. I mean, sorry, Pierre. Okay, so the idea of showing IT for HR, it's just that, a lot of people can easily get their heads around the end user enablement because it's something that we're fairly familiar with and it's easy. IT for HR, this example, is more about the more difficult services to define, which are services that are aligned to actually the business we're dealing with. And when I said earlier that a lot of those are pretty straightforward, we know that a business has HR, it has finance, it has probably legal and operational. So you can see, if you want to start aligning your services that way, that you could define them based on the business line of your organization. And that's an easy way of starting to build this. But again, the same structure applies that we've discussed on the previous slides. You know, IT for HR is the overall business service that you negotiate with your client with, and then, you know, there's a user request catalog that allows you to make requests based on that service. So same structure, same idea, and as you see here, there's an example where the service desk technical service appears in both of these services, end user enablement and IT for HR. So that's an example where you know, a technical service is used in two places, because some organizations would have a tendency of saying, well, service desk is a service. Well, it's not really. I mean, IT is not in the business of, you know, providing service desks. It's in the business of supporting the services through a service desk, right, which is kind of a, it's simple, but it's, you know, sometimes people get confused there.
Okay, terrific. Any last thoughts on this slide, Pierre?
Only that for the components underneath, they are targeted IT resources. In future webinars, we'll be talking or drilling down more into those components. But just remember that it is part of a component hierarchy where we start at the client and go in through the services and then everything underneath. And the importance of how things are tied together and how you can, you know, go up or down the hierarchy to understand where your impacts are and what you're providing, I think is key in terms of managing IT well. Right. You know, it is fundamental that this is captured and maintained through your various processes, you know, through change and so on. But yeah, it is part of a bigger package.
Right. And one last point on the business side, we do have a session coming up on the financial management within IT services. So this layer that Pierre is referring to on the technical side is going to become very critical in terms of how your underpinning infrastructure maps to a service in order to figure out what the cost of that service is. So we do have a session coming up on that as well. So on that note, on April 7th is our next 30-minute power webinar, and we're going to be talking about the organizational dependencies for success. So we'll step away from the more technical aspects for a bit and talk about how executive support of this initiative is critical. That, you know, these are multiple silos within IT that need to be broken down and come together to collaborate so that a service can be delivered and sustained and maintained and optimized. And it is a cultural shift. There's no doubt about that. So, you know, how do you go about that? So that'll be our next session. If you have any questions about today's topic, or if you'd like us to go deeper on something that we touched on today that isn't part of the current webinar agenda, please let us know. You can send information or questions to webinars@rapaconsulting.com. And we're happy to answer any one-on-one questions or set up any time with you at your convenience. So thank you for participating. Pierre and Richard, thank you as always. And
thank you.
We'll see you on April the 7th.
Okay. Yeah, good stuff.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.